Okay, so welcome to Jason Stoddard from Schiit. I think most people on the channel are going to know you fairly well already. I've reviewed lots of your gear, and I've actually interviewed you, I think only once before, but it was broken up into a few parts, so people might have seen multiple videos of yours on the channel. So, Jason, thanks for taking the time to come and chat to us today.
Well, thanks for talking to us. I mean, I'll be, like I said, I'll be making this up as I go along a bit if we're talking digital.
Yep, and actually that's a good segue into the way I wanted to start this video, which is that I wanted to wish Mike well, and I'm sure a lot of people will. The original plan for this video was we were going to have Mike and Jason join us, Mike being Jason's partner in Schiit, Mike Moffat, and I believe Mike's been dealing with some health issues, so I'm sure I'm not the only one sending our absolute best wishes to Mike, and we hope he recovers in a speedy fashion.
Yeah, and Mike is still he's like the strategic lead. So I'm, what I'm doing is I'm a little more involved in the day-to-day, so I know a little bit more of what's going on. So I can hopefully tease you, explain some things and maybe tease you a little bit with some of the stuff we're working on.
That sounds really good. We'll look forward to that for sure. And I've got a few questions that'll hopefully open that door. So let's see how we go. I've got a handful of questions written down, but as always with these things, we're bound to go off track, and that's totally fine as well. I asked my channel patrons if they had any specific questions to ask, and there's a couple that came through that were the same sorts of things you probably get on all the Q&As, but I thought I'll chuck them in there. We'll get them out of the way at the beginning, and then we'll do a deep dive. So one of the questions coming through, and this has also come up on the comments in some of my videos recently, there's been a bit of a delay in the availability of multi-bit modules for things like Jotunheim, I think the Modi multi-bit as well. So I was just curious what's causing that, and is there an end in sight for that one, Jason?
Yes. What's causing that is simply we can't get the DSPs that we're using. Okay. DSPs are digital signal processors that we actually use to implement our own digital filter for what we call the true multi-bit products. Those, even though, we have 20 or 40,000 of them on order, we have been waiting. They went from 16 weeks to 30 weeks to 50 weeks to 70 weeks to 90 weeks. Now they're telling us each time as we pass the deadline, oh, by the way, now it is. And I think the latest is 108 weeks, which might be real. The guys who do our purchasing are finally starting to make some hopeful noises that we will finally get analog devices, DSPs, in around June of next year.
Wow, that's a big delay though, isn't it? For you and therefore for the customers. Yeah,
these were supposed to originally ship in January of this year.
Big delay.
Yeah, it's a big delay, and it's it's the same problem that the car makers are having. We don't use 4 nanometer processes. We don't use the latest thing, so they're less thrilled about making the new stuff, the old stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In the meantime, we are moving some of our stuff to TI DSPs.
Okay. And FPGAs? There was talk of FPGAs at one point. Is that still a thing?
Yes, but that was for a new thing that we're working on.
Okay, so that's not gonna replace the current DSP modules in multi-bit so much as a future product.
If I'm very, very lucky, next week we're having a meet at our retail store. I will be able to bring the first of what we call Singularity, which is our 1-bit. Well, not 1-bit.
Okay.
Our own Delta Sigma modulator.
Fantastic.
Which would be implemented on an FPGA with external switches.
Okay, and you've just wonderfully jumped to one of my other questions, so let's go there. So my understanding is your Delta Sigma approach that you've built in-house is still going to use Mike's Mega Combo Burrito filter as part of that processing. Is that still the case?
Yes, that is the case, and not only are we using his filter, we're using our filter coefficient generator in our math for the upscaling. As the first step to doing a Delta Sigma modulator, you actually scale it up from, in this case, you'd go from 384 kilohertz to like 6 megahertz. And all those filters are actually done with our math, not with standard math.
Okay.
And then we have our own modulator that I'm going to hold back the hardware details, but it sounds really good. I've been listening to it for a while. Measures really good, as you would expect of a design like that.
Yep.
More, what I'd be showing is like an early prototype. It's not even in a package that's ready to ship anyway. It's not going to replace any of our DACs. We don't really know what the intro is going to be like, but let's put it this way. When DSPs go to 108 weeks, and then DACs, like our standard 8812s, the TI DAC 8812s, or the 5547, the AD 5547s, when those kind of get a little sketchy, we get real nervous. And so the best plan is to not have to use anybody's DACs. And oddly enough, FPGAs, if you want to spend 4 to 7 times the historical price, they're quite gettable.
Okay.
Won't be the cheapest thing in the world, not to start. But we're also hearing, as of middle of next year, FPGAs get better. We'll see. Don't know. Yep. We have no idea what's happening. But what we'd love to do is actually bring everything to the point where people say, well, what filter are you using? We're using ours. What DAC are you using? We're using ours. All through the line. But
fantastic.
That's going to take a lot of doing.
Yeah, right. Okay. So that's an interesting one. I'm just trying to think how there's a few questions that this all relates to that I had for us today. So let's go to the first question that jumps to mind, which is going to Delta Sigma rather than your traditional multi-bit approach. Do you, and I know you generally don't like to make recommendations or state which one sounds better, but do you personally have a preference between your traditional multi-bit approach and the new Delta Sigma approach?
Depends on the unit.
Okay.
Almost entirely. Here's actually what I should also say is we're not going away from multi-bit. In fact, we have a new generation of multi-bit that you've started seeing in Bifrost 264 that actually is quite high performance for multi-bit, works very well, and a lot of the kind of the icky, not so great measuring and not so wonderful performance sides of things with the early implementations, that's gone. They are doing very well. They're not going to light the world on fire. This is not a measurement product, but they're doing very well. So we're going to continue down that line. But I could totally see in the future you could choose, a multi-bit product or a Delta Sigma product, both with our tech in it. And interestingly, I had one of our next gen multi-bits here. Sitting next to the prototype, sitting next to the prototype for Singularity. And in the case of running it into Folkvangr, our giant, 10-tube headphone amp, which is kind of warm and wet and tubey and stuff.
Yeah, I have one here and I love it.
Yeah, the multi-bit was a bit much. I mean, it was a little too big and fat and warm and silly. The one bit was great.
Okay.
So, and it's not one bit, but it's just easier to call it that.
Yeah.
I'm still getting used to my own marketing terms. I'm trying to get everyone to call it Singularity, and all the, Dave and Ivana and everyone are probably throwing up in there.
And this is probably a good time just to clarify for people that aren't familiar with digital terminology and different DAC sort of architectures, if you like. So there is your traditional Delta Sigma DACs are built on your Sabre chips, AKM chips, etc. Then Schiit has their own multi-bit, which is completely different, where I'm trying to find a quick way to explain. Actually, maybe I'll throw it to you. How would you, in layman's terms, explain the difference between a traditional chip-based Delta Sigma and a multi-bit from Schiit?
That's a great question, and here's why. You can have a multi-bit Delta Sigma DAC. And in fact, a lot of companies actually say, yeah, we do multi-bit, and but then they say we use this DAC, which is clearly a Delta Sigma DAC. And that's because when Delta Sigma came out, they typically were 1-bit implementations. And then they quickly went to 2 and 3 and 5 and deeper implementations in order to get better performance. But at its core, what you're doing is a 2 or 5 or 7-bit implementation that is not all of the bits. What we're trying to do is get as deep as we can. In some cases, we use 20-bit DACs. In the case of Yggdrasil, the OG version, uses 4 20-bit DACs where you actually put in 20 bits at a time and it outputs a number. There's no guessing, there's no interpolation, this is just what it does. And these are astoundingly expensive industrial DACs that are not meant for audio. Right now, the cost of those DACs is about $102 each. So
Wow.
there's 4 of those in an Yggy OG. In some cases, we use 16-bit DACs, and we stack them up. We might use 4 of them, or 8. Actually, we're using 8 of them in Bifrost 264. And we don't just stack them up as far as parallel to output. We have a bunch of silly math and stuff we do with it, and to get better performance. The thing is, this is the old way that digital used to be done. When the first CD players came out, they were all multi-bit. They were trying to cram 16 bits, or in some cases 14 bits on the earliest ones, into a DAC, get a 14 to 16-bit representation out, and call it a day. And I think it's interesting to look at the numbers, because 16-bit is 65,000 discrete levels. 20-bit is 1 million discrete levels. And when you start talking to an engineer and you're going, okay, so you go into 1 microvolt to 1 volt, they're like, okay, there's actually not a lot of stuff that's running at the microvolt, noise level, period. And okay, so now we go to 24-bit, which is 16 million levels. So you're talking in the nanovolts, and engineers just start laughing. It's like, you're going to end up with maybe 21, 22 bits if you really, really try real hard and have complete control over it. And, you might be able to, get somewhere near that. 32 bits is laughable. I mean, you're talking like Big Bang versus, the noise floor of your house.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding that correctly, what we're saying is theoretically, from a pure mathematical on paper point of view, more bits is better. But in real life musical applications, there comes a point at which those teeny tiny signal levels are just irrelevant. Is that really what we're saying?
That's pretty much it. Plus, we don't know the provenance of a lot of the digital files that we're using. We don't know really what the bit depth is. If you actually take a look at a well-recorded piece of music, I mean, you may be hitting 80 or 90 dB, essentially noise, minus 80, minus 90 dB noise floor. That's really good. And so we're now arguing about products. It's like, oh, it's minus 122 and this other one's on 118, so the 122 is better.
And you can't really hear the difference anyway.
Yeah, when you hit play on your 1980s recording of your favorite new wave band, the first thing you hear is shh. It's like there's noise floor. Doesn't matter what it measures like, or it doesn't. Okay, for noise floor it doesn't matter. For distortion we can have another argument.
Yeah, that's it. Absolutely. Yeah. And I certainly don't want this to become a measurements conversation. I've actually just done a big session with that reviewer interview I told you about before we hit record. That was a conversation specifically around which measurements do we find useful, not useful as reviewers. So that's being well discussed at the moment. So we won't open that can. While we're talking multi-bit versus Delta Sigma, one of the things I've always found particularly interesting about multi-bit, and there's a couple of technologies that do this. So for me personally as a listener, I find multi-bit, R2R, and the Chord DACs where they're using the WTA filters designed by Rob Watts. Those 3 technologies for me are the 3 that provide the most natural sense of depth and layering in soundstage. Whereas I find consistently, and some are better than others, but generally consistently, the Delta Sigma, and I mean the chip-based, like I said before, the ESS, the AKMs, those chip-based DACs tend to have quite a flat soundstage that's very left-right, good left-right separation, but often lack in that depth. Is there an explanation you can provide as to why, and let's just focus on the multi-bit, why does the multi-bit give that sense of depth that the more traditional Delta Sigmas, and even if we compare, say, the Modius, which is a great little DAC, with the Bifrost 2, when I compared the two of those, the biggest difference was you suddenly get a sense of depth and individual notes. So say a singer, a vocalist, you'll almost be able to hear a sense of shape and three-dimensionality to their area of sound that I find is lost on your chip-based Delta Sigmas. Is there a reason for that you can explain?
It's really interesting that you actually call out those three approaches. What we're calling true multibit, an R2R DAC, which are typically discrete these days, and then the core WT8 filters. The thing those all have in common is we all have our own filters. The filters are really, I think, where the magic is, and that's the thing that strikes me is when I go from one of our Delta Sigma implementations to a true multibit, even like a Modi multibit. It is strikingly different. Now, I can get into all sorts of stuff that people are going to argue about, and Mike has said, we have the one true filter, the closed form, filter, and we do have our own math. We do have our own coefficient generator. That's we're not going to argue about that, but we do have a unique approach that we're trying to optimize both time domain and frequency domain at the same time. And our frequency domain optimization actually goes a little farther out for a given sample rate than your typical implementation that you see.
Okay.
If you actually look at the response of our filters, it's a bit different. It is not going to be one of the, what they call the minimum phase filters or anything like that. We don't believe those are correct because what people call pre-ringing that's just baked into sampling. I mean, if you actually torture yourself by going to some engineering, start with communications, then go into a discrete time communications, then get into digital filters. You go, oh yeah, it's not pre-ringing. It's like that is the consequence of a sample time system. Period. You're going to have, and pushing all that past the edge. That's a decision you can make, but it is not technically correct. It could sound good, but it's not technically correct.
And I think if I'm putting the pieces together properly, and I'm not trying to get us into a comparison directly here, but I think that's something that Rob Watts talks about a lot as well, is that he's very much about using the sync function and the fact that pre-ringing, as you said, is actually necessary for reconstructing the signal effectively.
Exactly.
And that it's not some weird unnatural phenomenon in the world. It's purely to do with digital sampling and the way digital sampling works, is my understanding. So I had a little chuckle to myself then when you said that Mike sort of likes to say you've got the one true filter, because that's exactly what Rob Watts says. And I find it interesting that the engineers that have designed these things, there's mathematical evidence that their way is the right way potentially, but there's obviously also other ways that are the right way as well. So,
yeah, I mean, if Mike was here, he could do it much better, because he was asked very early on, what filter are you using? And he's like, the right one. And they said, well, are you going to give us any other options? He's like, no. So, and that has actually changed because of my complaining. We now actually do give you the option to turn off the filter.
Good point. I wanted to ask you about that too. What was the reasoning for wanting to be able to switch it off?
A lot of people do like the way NOS non-oversampling DACs sound. It's personally not my favorite thing.
Yep.
But a lot of people love the way it sounds, and I'm like, well, how hard is it to get one of our DACs to do that? And Dave's like, I can just turn off the filter, in firmware. I'm like, oh. So, and Mike, had a little bit of heartburn about that, because he's like, well, are we selling our filter short? And I said, no, it's you portray it as it's our way or the highway. So it's the my way or the highway switch.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's fine, because people can then use their own oversamplers, or they can use no filter at all.
Yep.
And it's worked out really well. It just gives you more flexibility. It's not hurting anyone. We aren't saying here's 17 different filters you can choose from, which is...
Yeah, and I think that's helpful, because so often, with some of the products that come out where, like the Sabre chips give you access, if the manufacturer implements it, give you access to every single filter on the chip. And you can go mad trying to flip through them, deciding which is better, because it can depend on the track you're listening to, the headphones you're using. It's just, I think it's too much choice personally.
Oh, it gets worse. On Sabre, you can actually run your own coefficients too.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it's not like doing your own digital filter, but you do have access to some coefficients.
Okay.
Yeah, so the rabbit hole can go extremely deep on ESS, and that's why I think, at least for now, you're going to see us sticking with that direction rather than going back to AKM really quickly.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, we're talking to AKM. There's actually a couple products I would love to have AKM in because they're easier to implement, and in some cases, some applications they sound better. But then again, we tweak the ESS, and that'll sound better.
They can both sound fantastic in the right setup, can't they?
Yeah. And it's like, I've when Denise said, "Oh, I'd love to talk to Mike about digital," I'm like, "Oh yeah, I could actually take that because I've been involved in doing the simple digital stuff for a while, and then now I really am starting to get a flavor of what Dave and Ivana and actually we have one other team member working on the FPGA side of things, what they're working on, and there's some spectacular stuff that we're going to be seeing real soon."
Fantastic. That's exciting. I think it's really cool that you've just clarified for me something I never really contemplated and thought about this, which is that when you're switching to NOS mode now on the Bifrost 2/64, that means you're literally just turning off any filtering at all. So you're taking it straight out of the DAC chips, just doing the conversion of here's what the digital sample says, here's the analog output, do with it what you want sort of thing without filtering it.
Correct.
That's really nice. So it now means, because I've written my notes for the Bifrost 2/64 review, but I haven't actually recorded it yet. And I'm with you on the fact that I definitely prefer it with the filter switched on. I won't explain now what it is because I haven't got my notes in front of me and I don't want to butcher it. But for me, it was definitely a preference towards having it with the filters. So I think that's really cool that people can actually now hear for themselves, this is what the filter is bringing. So if people have gone, well, what's all this about the Mega Combo Burrito filter? Switch it on and off and you can see for yourself. That's really cool to know that we can do that.
Exactly. And I don't, and at least for me, I don't get kind of the sense of depth, the layering like you're talking with NOS. Now, if you used another external digital filter, did oversampling, can you get that? Well, that's up to you. I mean, one of the great things about this whole business is there's a lot of companies out there. There's something for everyone, and there are companies that will be like, yeah, here's our digital oversampling filter, that you can run on your PC. You can run 10,000 different modes, and you can see what you'd like. That's great. We are much more like, put it on your desk, turn it on, press a button. I'd like to keep it really the experience simple, and the implementation at a high level. Hopefully we're hitting a decent mark as far as sound, but also simple. That's why you won't see a lot of things with screens and menus and stuff like that.
Which I certainly appreciate. I'm not saying it's the only way. I have DACs that I appreciate where you get that control, and I have DACs that I appreciate where you don't. And certainly I do like that ability just to switch it on, plug it in, and away you go. Or probably the other way around, plug it in, then switch it on and go for it. And that's something you just said there leads to another question that I had from one of the patrons, which was, there was some talk at one stage, I think Dave might have thrown this out there on a Q&A call, about looking at whether or not Unison could accept higher than 192 kilohertz in the future. And that obviously now ties in with the idea of having the NOS filters. If people want to use, say, HQ Player, which is one of those examples of a PC-based oversampler, they might want to output a much higher sample rate via USB. Is that something that's potentially going to be possible in the future with a Schiit DAC?
It is. Dave, I talked to Dave about this, and who knows, we may be able to sneak this into the Urd when that comes out, because that's not just transport, it's digital I/O and everything. It really just comes down to power draw. What we were trying to do is hit a level where we could actually, stay under 100 milliamps, power draw, and run everything and not have any problems. If we actually run the microprocessor a little faster, we can actually do 384. Now that's something you want us to test, significantly before we let it go. But there's a possibility for it in the future. We haven't had a lot of ask for it. I went to a get together recently. Alex Rawson, formerly of Odyssey, did a little get-together at his headphone shop. And I brought an Urd, and everyone was like, "Oh, you have two USB inputs and one USB output and SPDIF and this." And I mean, yeah, I've been telling you guys, it's a hub. You can do a bunch of different things with it. And I said, but it's 192, so that may be a thing. And everyone there, at least there, was like, "Oh, we don't care about that."
Yeah.
But there are people who do care about 384 and even higher. So who knows what the future will bring. I know people would love to light up some of those extra lights on the Yggy.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, I'm certainly one of those. I get asked occasionally on the channel about how product X performs with DSD, and my answer is I don't really know because I don't bother testing it. I'm not a DSD user. I use streaming services that go up to 192, and I've got a local collection of mostly Redbook and a little bit of high-res stuff that I've bought and downloaded over the years. So I'm not one of those that's in the can it do more than 192 camp. I don't really care, but I do get why people want it for those that want to use an HQ player, for example, as one of the options, or even upsampling in a software like Rune or JRiver. Those can do it as well in different ways. So to each their own.
Actually, where Mike and I diverge, he's like very much, I have a CD, I play the Holy CD, or I have the record, I play the Holy record. And I'm like, I use Cobus, and that's what I use. It's like, oh, you're a heathen, it doesn't sound as good. I'm like, I said, you're comparing a CD against something that's probably been remastered 3 or 4 times since that CD came out. So maybe, that's a factor.
Yeah, that's it. And then there was also the convenience. And I've forgotten how many CDs I ended up with before I stopped buying CDs, I should say. But they're all in wallets, up in a cupboard. I've ripped them all to my hard drive. I occasionally have to grab one out because one of the files is corrupt and I've got to re-rip it, but that's about as much interaction as I have with CDs these days, just purely for convenience. And yes, they might sound a bit better, but then there's another box I've got to have on my desk, and there's the time factor of flipping between CDs. It's not for me.
Yeah, and that's, we have about 2,500 CDs here between my wife and I. I think we both brought about 1,200 to the collection, and they're still, like, on walls. I mean, if I could flip the camera around, it's like, oh boy, there we go, CD.
Yeah.
Never got into records that much, but we still have those. So it's like, okay, I can use an Urd, and hilariously, when I had one here, I just, listen to streaming.
Yeah, well, that's it. I must say I'm very much looking forward to the Urd from a couple of points of view. A is to actually test the whole CDs rather than streaming thing. But the idea of that versatility of a hub, I think, is going to be quite transformative for some people's systems, because we're so limited at the moment with having to have multiple USB outputs tied up on a computer, being limited to only having 1 or 2 devices running. I think it's going to be a pretty amazing device if it works the way I understand it's going to. Yeah.
We have a ton of people who immediately ask, can you just leave the transport part off? And maybe add a couple more USBs. It's like anything can happen. We just got to see what the demand is, see how it works out. It's one of those products that it's brand new. What's nice is it allowed us to test out some technology that will be, appearing in other stuff in the future.
Fantastic. And I'm guessing that means a technology you can't currently talk about.
Can't really. I mean, we showed the pitch shifting, what we call the gadget, years ago. And Mike, since then has worked up a dynamics recovery, algorithm works, similarly. And, we keep talking about what are we going to do with these. And I think next year you might actually see what we're going to do with these. It will not be a typical Schiit product. It'll be more like, okay, let's see what we can do with this in terms of, capability and form factor and everything. But who knows? It's so early on, I realized it's like, well, you can get the heavy duty DSPs to run this. You can get big FPGAs. So maybe we make a few and see what people think.
Very cool.
Yeah, and if people think it's good, then we can always move it down. The old way of doing things when Mike started Theta was like you start with the biggest, craziest thing you can think of, and then you move it down market.
Okay.
And we've almost always gone the opposite, but that was because, we're a new player breaking into a new market, and let's face it, the world needs more $100 stuff rather than, $5,000 stuff.
Interesting. So just backtracking for a second to the Urd, and so for those that don't know, the Urd is it's not released yet. It's a new product coming, and it's got a CD transport as well as being a digital hub that will take USB in, USB out, various other inputs and outputs that are digital as well, I believe.
It has two USB ins, one USB out, so you actually can play a CD through USB out if it so moves you, or you can switch between the two USB inputs from streamer, computer, etc. It also has SPDIF out, so you can also use it as a USB to SPDIF converter at a very high level if that so moves you. And that's a lot of new stuff. It's kind of it's an extension of what we call our Unison USB, because now we have a Unison USB input and then a Unison USB host. So the host and the input can actually talk to each other. And we did that rather than going to an ARM microprocessor. We played with that a bit and decided to stick with what we know. And it's really funny because the size of the DSPs and the size of the FPGAs, we keep looking at them like, this is crazy, guys. Everyone's using much smaller things. Like, they're using audio DSPs and audio related stuff. They have a bunch of functions built in. You just call the functions, you do it, and what we need is floating point calculation, and all floating point all the time. Okay, that's too bad because I can get you, non-floating point or audio-based DSPs all day, but I can't get you what you actually need.
Yeah, right. Okay. So, and it's that same old story. It's almost like going back to where we started this conversation around the chip-based Delta Sigma DACs. You can choose to go off the shelf, plug it in, switch it on, choose which functions you're using, and off it goes, or you do it your own way and spend the money and the time to make it work.
Yeah, and actually one of the appealing things to the ESS approach, I don't know how much I can talk about this because I know they make you sign NDAs and stuff, but one of the appealing things is it is much more protean than you'd expect from a typical Delta Sigma DAC, in that it has a lot of stuff you can play with.
Okay.
You can also get in trouble, because the more controls you have, the more pain you can have too. Now I think we have a pretty good handle on it, and people seem to be pretty happy with actually the Modi they like, and Modius they seem to be really happy with on the ESS side. And it's funny because I actually like Modi better than Modius, but whatever.
That's it. I'm finding in recent times I've done a bit of a deep dive into balanced versus single-ended DACs and amps actually. And I still think there's something to be said for the sound of single-ended, and technically it might give us less ability to separate channels in terms of crosstalk and stuff like that. But I think you get a payoff in return. I find the sound of a single-ended can be a little bit more cohesive in a way. The sense of note weight, I think, and this could be due to crosstalk, the sense of note weight and the presence of, say, a vocalist or a centralized instrumental piece of music can actually be better, I think, on single-ended. So that maybe that's what's going on between the Modius and the Modi. Who knows?
It depends a lot on the implementation, and it's funny. We had a lot of people kind of take me to task on Folkvangr, very expensive 10-tube amp. Like, there's no balanced inputs, there's no balanced outputs. I'm like, of course there is. It's a tubing. It's high impedance output. You don't want to double that, right? And I don't know what you're talking about, but I want balanced output. It's like, no, actually, you don't want balanced output. Like, well, why don't you have balanced input? I'm like, well, you could maybe, but why?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a place for everything. A lot of stuff I really enjoy. I mean, heck, I got a Yggy Multibit on my desk. It is now feeding an old Milner 2. Don't take that as a sign of imminent, it's imminent, coming back to life. But I keep looking at it and going, what can I do with a solid state thing in that form factor? And all I have are stupid ideas right now. So
Okay.
yeah.
Maybe one day.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get a chance to ask one little question I had about the Urd, and this might have been answered before. Is the Urd going to allow people to rip CDs through it as well? Will it have a data signal back to a PC?
It will not.
It will not. Okay, so it's purely a transport for playback.
And in fact, it's a CD mechanism. It's not a computer mechanism. It's not a DVD mechanism. It is a CD that's by the old, the ex-Philips guys who went and did their own thing in Austria. I mean, that we're actually using a real good transport.
Okay.
And we've had great luck with that. Early on, we were playing around with some of the computer-based stuff, and it was not as good.
Yeah.
Something that even if this comes out with say a 5-year warranty, and then I don't know on the transport, maybe 2. I don't know if we can do 5. That's a tough one. I don't know about things that move.
Yeah, good point.
But I certainly would want to give you, on the computer transports we were using, I wouldn't want to give you 90 days. So,
really?
Yeah, the fact that we're thinking, maybe 2 years, it's that's pretty good, actually.
Okay. Wow, that's surprising to hear that.
Yeah, it's just we, obviously we are not going to get the first selects, of anyone who's going to be building something. Who knows who's making these things?
Yeah, right.
These days, and right now it's harder and harder to get one of a form factor that's built to be rugged. It's mainly we have something tiny that could fit in a laptop
that does the job. Yeah, not what you're looking for. And there's an interesting piece that comes up there, and feel free to sidestep this one if you want to. One of the common arguments that comes up in digital is bits are bits. If it can read the data off the CD, it's just the data. As long as you can capture it off the CD, how can the transport make a difference? Is there a sonic difference, or is it just a reliability difference that you're talking about here?
Oh boy, yeah, that's a very deep and messy. All I can do is give you my own experience, which is, I agree. There should not be any difference. There shouldn't be any difference between USB cables. There shouldn't be any difference between sources. There shouldn't be any difference between transports. Period. End of statement. However, when Mike came out with Unison, when he gave me the early version of Unison, he said, this thing sounds fantastic. It's wonderful. This is great. I'm like, Mike, it's a USB connection. Who cares? How could this possibly do anything? So I humored him. I plugged it in and immediately went, wait a minute. I said, this is cool. This is broken. I can measure how it's broken. I can show Mike, it's euphonically broken. So, please fix it. And back then it was so unstable you actually couldn't measure it on the AP. It just didn't play well with ASIO. Later version, which sounded the same, finally got it working on the AP, and I measured it, and it measured exactly the same as everything else.
Yeah.
And Mike's like, that's nice. It's all, but it sounds different. And he's like, well, why are you worried about it? I'm like, because it shouldn't sound different. We had another thing. Mike's going to kill me for telling me this. When we introduced the 3 flavors of egg Brazil, we did a true double-blind test, as in we had someone come in, set up the 3 Yggys, at the shitter, and then he left. There was no way to tell what anything was going through a box that we didn't have any control over other than X, Y, and Z. That's all you can do. And I figured this is great because Mike and Dave hated the more is less version. They said, this is horrible. It's the worst sounding thing ever. And I'm like, more is less sounds great to me. I don't know what the big deal is. And I said, we're going to do this double blind thing because I want Mike and Dave to say, I like the more is less. I want them to pick that. When it's blind, I want them to pick that. Ha! Gotcha. Finally. So Mike and Dave went in, after the press was done, and the press hadn't discussed anything yet. We hadn't revealed anything yet. They went in another room. Mike and Dave went in. They came out literally 60 seconds later. They said, X is this, Y is this, Z is this. And they were 100% right. 3 DACs, level matched, double blind, and they called them, every single one. And I'm
Wow.
like, I don't believe that's even possible. I trust them. I totally trust them. Now, when Dave says something sounds bad, it probably is. And he made a couple tweaks to Urd recently, and he's like, yeah, I did this and that. I'm like, Dave, that can't possibly be. He's like, yeah, I know.
Bet it does.
But it does. But then also when Dave says, oh, you need to use a certain Ethernet cable, and I'm like, oh God. Yeah.
And I think this is where it does get tricky, and there'll be some people who've got their backs up from this conversation probably. It does get tricky because in my experience, I've definitely found USB cables to make a difference, as many viewers of the channel will know whether they like it or not. As in, I know some people don't like it.
I don't like for the record, I do not like it, and I refuse to play around with it myself. But if you say there's a difference, I can't refute it.
Yeah, and I think this is where it does get tricky, because it seems we don't fully understand the why of it yet, and that's the missing link. Mm-hmm. And so without the understanding of the why, we're all just going, well, I'm hearing this and someone else isn't hearing that, and who knows. But I think where I was sort of heading with that point with it was that it is one of those rabbit holes where, for me personally, I've drawn a line where I'm like, I'm happy to play with USB cables. That's great. There's a limit to how many times I'm going to try and filter, reclock, playing with Ethernet cables till the cows come home. And I think that's a choice that everyone can make for themselves. Is what's you've just said you're not wanting to play with USB cables. That's fine. The difference is minimal anyway. So do you want to invest the time there, or do you want to invest the time somewhere else that you're more going to get enjoyment from? Well,
you also, here's the thing. You have to take everyone with a grain of salt, because my reaction to cables in general is like, wait a minute. Okay, so we have a product here that we spent a year of design hours engineering. It has 1,000 parts in it. It's gone through all these safety certifications, gone through all listening tests, gone through everything. And now you're saying, well, if you attach this cable to it that, by the way, costs more than your thing, I'm like, that's actually fundamentally, I don't like that. It may be true, but I don't like it. And, that's because it's my thing. And I have to be very careful when I create a new amp not to think, oh, this is the greatest thing ever, because it may not be. The new toy syndrome and the yes invented here syndrome are real things. You got to be super careful.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Other people listen to it and go, yeah. And preferably you have them listen to it in a vacuum. They don't know what they're listening to.
Yeah, that would be the ideal, just to get rid of any of those biases and expectations and whatnot. But it is hard. It's hard to create those completely isolated opportunities.
It's super difficult, and I don't want to insult any manufacturer out there. It's just that everyone has their bias, and ours is like, well, if it's not electronics, but hey, it could just be everything matters. That's the way it is.
Yep, exactly. I think so. We've gone wonderfully off track a little bit, and I've just glanced down at my questions, and there's a couple I'd really love to cover off before we wrap up here. One of them is the with the NOS functionality. I think you've already kind of answered this one. The NOS functionality on Bifrost 2 64, that therefore, in fact, it can be on regular Bifrost 2 if you want to flash the firmware. Is that therefore also potentially coming to Yggys and Gumbies and any of the other multibits?
I'm sure we'll get there. People have been asking us for that and for remote control and stuff on Yggy for a while. I'm sure we'll get there. Right now, it's been such an interesting year between us creating a lot of new stuff and just all the craziness. There's some things I would have liked to have seen already, and they're not here yet. Some things have been pushed out past the end of the year. One of them actually would be a great discussion, because it's a really weird product, because it's both analog and it's digital, and it had to have a very, very strong listening component to develop it, and not just in what you'd expect. It's a really weird thing, and it's totally heretical because part of it's discrete, part of it's op amp, part of it's an ESS DAC, and it's all over the map.
Interesting. So that's obviously a conversation we can't have right now, but maybe one to schedule for a follow-up, yeah?
Yeah, that was one thing I wanted to get out before the end of the year. It looks like that's going to be past the end of the year.
Okay.
Alps finally, they're usually great, but yeah, they blew one shipping date. It's like, well, there we go. The one critical part, we're done.
Ouch. Okay. So it sounds like that's a moment for a stay tuned for early next year. We'll hopefully come back around to another one of these to talk about whatever that product is going to be by the sound of it.
Yeah, I think that'll be pretty controversial. I think some people are going to love it and some people are really going to hate it.
Okay.
Just ideologically, it's very challenging.
Okay. I must say I like those sorts of products personally. They're the sorts of products I love featuring on the channel because so much of what we have in this hobby we've had forever, in the sense that DACs, amps, there's not, there can be little tweaks here and there with the latest DAC chip or whatever that gives you an extra 1 dB of noise floor space, etc. But we don't often see significant shifts in what's out there. And in fact, that's one of the reasons I was very quick to snap up a Folkvangr for myself, because I'm like, this is different. No one else has done this. I've got OTL amps. I've got transformer coupled amps. I definitely have never come across a 10-tube OTL OCL amp. And for those wanting to know more about that one, I've got a review coming for that one soon. So I'll explain all of those terms I've just thrown around in that one. But if we just take a sidestep, and I know this was going to be a digital chat, but given that we're here, we're talking about new and different things. What was the reason for the 8 tubes in the Folkvangr for the output tubes? Is that purely to get power? Is it something about reducing output impedance by running them in parallel or something? What was the reasoning?
Both, but mainly to get a reasonable amount of power before before you have to use the impedance multiplier.
Yep.
So Folkvangr is not a powerhouse by any stretch of the imagination, but it actually does fairly decently with a lot of planers. And I listened to it without the impedance multiplier, and I basically just kept adding tubes until it's like, oh, this sounds pretty good with Odysseys, so I'm good.
Okay.
It's not the be all end all amp, and I think that's the thing. It's like if you want the be all end all is what I have on my desk in Texas rather than here is the Lear Plus. That thing drives anything. It's quiet, etc. But it's not a Folkvangr. Folkvangr has some very, very neat qualities, especially with some dynamic headphones.
Yeah.
It's addictive in some cases.
It is absolutely one of those, and I don't think we've ever come across an amp quite like this. I've had other amps where there's nice pairings. I've got the Bottlehead mainline under my desk here. I've got an Elekit TU8200R over to my left. They've both got lovely qualities, and there's some headphones that do suit them well, but there is something about, and I'm guessing it's the fact that it's that direct coupling to the tubes. There is something about the connection between the Folkvangr and a headphone like my current absolute addiction with it is the ZMF Atrium.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There is something about the combination of that. So it's a 300 ohm driver, which goes really nice with the output impedance. There's a transparency with the Folkvangr that is different to what I would normally call transparency. Transparency can mean so many things. Sometimes it's hearing every little detail in the music. It's hearing it without any sense of coloration. It's like with the Folkvangr, you're hearing textures and harmonics and nuances in the music. I was listening to a track last night doing some tube rolling with the Folkvangr. A patron sent me a bunch of tubes that he's found work really well with it. And I was playing around, and it was piano, vocal, drums, bass. It was Amazing Rhythm Aces was the band. And it was one of those things where you're hearing a piano in a way that you've never quite heard it before. And I'm not saying it's necessarily better than everything else, but it's different and it's engaging and it's... So yeah, there's definitely something interesting going on there with that direct coupling of the tubes. And on that note, why the decision to go even without the capacitors was... I mean, obviously you can buy wonderful sounding capacitors that can go in the chain and sound fantastic.
it was a theory, and I didn't think it would work. Mike and I had an argument about this early because Mike's like, no, we should start winding our own transformers. We should do transformer coupled amps. I'm like, everyone does transformer coupled amps. If we do our own transformers, cool, that's great. But neither of us knows a whole lot about transformers. So why? Why? I said we should probably try to eliminate the output coupling cap. He's like, oh, that'll be horrible. It'll sound like ass. It'll be thin and nasty and gross. And I'm like, yeah, actually, based on what I know about what output coupling caps do, I'd expect it to sound thinner, nastier, brighter, and like not right. And so I'm like, I'll do a prototype. So I put a prototype together, brought it home, sat down, plugged in actually some Burritos to start, because I figured let's give it something easy to drive but difficult in terms of load. And about an hour and a half later, my wife came down from upstairs and said, "So, are you ever going to make dinner?" I'm like, yeah, no. This is like way too good. I told Mike, I said, "Okay, so you have to hear this." He heard it. He's like, "Oh shit." He's like, "This is actually good."
Yep.
Yeah. So I said, "It's worth doing a few of these. We have a limited amount of tubes, so let's do a few and see how it goes." And yeah, I think we're almost out of them.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we probably have about 15 left.
I was shocked that they lasted that's why I reached out to you and Denise, I think just before the release date, and I said, how do I make sure I get my hands on one of these? Because, and for anyone wondering, I absolutely paid full price for it. There were no special deals or anything on this because it's a unique amp. It was just me wanting to make sure I could somehow get myself in the queue, because being in Australia, the release date or the release time of it was going to be in our evening when I was sound asleep. So I wanted to reach out and see if there was any way I could arrange that. As it turns out, I didn't need to worry because they have hung around, and that shocks me for such a unique, potentially once in a lifetime type of amp. But with the tube choice, I was curious to know, was that driven by the fact that you needed a certain tube to work as an OTL, OCL type design? You needed it to sound a certain way, have certain characteristics, or was it an availability question, or a bit of both?
It really came down to, we have a lot of 6N1 and 6N6Ps.
Okay.
The 6N6P is also really good for this particular duty. It's got very low plate impedance. It's not as low as, say, like the 6AS7, but it's low. It's one of the better tubes you can use for this type of output duty. It really comes down to, let's see, what else could we use? A couple of 6AS7, and basically unobtainium stuff from the 50s and 60s. It's like, That's what we got. Or you could, you want to go completely bonkers, maybe 24 to 32 6N1Ps. That'd be fun. By the way, we're not doing that ever. Yeah. We do have a lot of 6N1Ps, but we're not doing that.
Yeah. There's got to be a limit. Like, that would become, it's already a difficult amp to house, on a desk like mine, because you've got a lot of width, a bit of depth, but a lot of the width you can't stack anything on top of because it's got tubes sticking out of it.
I know. Yeah. Trust me. It's like, I truly hate this thing in some ways. And it's mainly because it's like, okay, I can have that on my desk, or I can have a Mjolnir. You can't put one on top of the other, or it's like, okay, whatever. I give up. So I cycle between them, and I'm like, okay, why do I still like the Mjolnir for some things, but it's really, it comes down to headphones. That'll drive anything, and you are kind of particular with Folkvangr.
Yeah, I must say, I was lamenting with one of the patrons that side panel on the Folkvangr. So the Folkvangr is a fairly wide amp, and then there's a panel on one side that's the normal metal, and then there's a cutout for all the tubes. And I might even throw a photo of it up on the screen when I'm talking about this. The space on the side is tantalizingly close to the size of a Bifrost 2, but not quite there. And I said, if only it was that size, it would have made the most amazing desktop stack with a Bifrost 2, but not quite.
Of course. Oh god, and I don't have a Bifrost 2 right now. I've been using the various prototypes, and so I actually don't have one. And right now I don't have anything other than Yggy Multibit. I will. I need. I need to have a layer plus Bifrost 2 stack because I do think that's nice and capable and does pretty much everything well.
Yeah.
But then it's like, so what do we do? I guess we put a Gungnir Multibit underneath the Folkvangr.
Yeah, that probably makes the most sense if you're happy with the height. Yeah.
But yeah, that's a lot of stuff to put on a desk.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, you're fully into crazy desk territory. We have one guy who loves our stuff, and he's like, oh, I have an Yggy and Ragnarok and stuff on my desk. I'm like, what? He sent me a picture. His desk is 10 feet long. I'm like, of course.
Yeah.
So
I'm not far behind, to be honest. I've got my monitor sitting on top of the Yggy right now, and the Folkvangr's off to the right of it. That's all the shit that's currently on my desk, but there's normally a Bifrost 2 floating around as well. So yeah, I know the feeling on that one, and it's the same. I've had to actually custom build my own desk to accommodate the craziness that is this hobby. So I can relate.
Yeah, it's like that. I'm sorry, I have a fairly small desk here and a fairly small desk in Texas. And I actually don't even have an office here in the shop in Texas or California. It's like I work on the production floor because I'd much rather know what the heck is going on with our products.
Yep. And I think that certainly from my point of view, that shows, and I'm not saying this just to blow smoke or anything like that, but I think it shows with the products that there's a level of connection that's clear from you as one of the designers of the products. Everything that comes out has a clear sense of thought to it. It's not just, let's put out the next reiteration because we can and people will buy it again. I like the fact that with Schiit products, I see that, there's a logical step from this one to this one, and it makes sense that you could have that or you could have that depending on your preferences. And I think the only way to have that is to stay connected and really kind of get in there and understand it. And actually on that note, that wasn't planned, but it's an accidental segue into one of my questions, which was, Bifrost 264, in my opinion, is a nice step up from the stock Bifrost to the original OG Bifrost 2. I know some people don't necessarily like the slightly leaner sound. They prefer the older, richer sound of the Bifrost original, but Bifrost 2 original. But I certainly prefer the 264. On that note, though, Gumby's been quiet for a long time. There's been no major changes to that. And I had to wonder for myself, has Bifrost 264 closed the gap so much with Yggy that the Gumby doesn't have a place in the future, or are there plans that it will have a place?
For me, it's certainly closed the gap, but I mean, here we actually have had lots of discussions about this. Gungnir Multibit is going to actually go on hiatus as soon as we've sold out or whatever we have because we can't get the DSPs for it. And what we're doing is we're saying we're going to continue with Bifrost, we're going to continue with Yggy, and the future of Gungnir is a question mark. So, actually, here we go. Let's do a product design thing. Here are my choices. Number one, you kill it, and that's not great. I mean, you have 800 to 24 or 2200.
Big jump.
Yeah, it's a decent thing. Plus, people love to stack things, and Gungnir Multibit is the same size as Freya, same size as an Urd, So I'd love to actually have that in the line. So killing it's not a great idea. Yeah. We can bring it back in its current form. That is one of the earliest products we designed. It is rough to put together. It has a lot of stuff in it that doesn't even conform to kind of our current digital thinking. And that's why that's the only thing that has to come back to us to be upgraded, because typically there has to be firmware changes on the motherboard we didn't plan for. Or we update it and bear the wrath of everyone, because by updating it, it means it probably goes to a Bifrost 2 style autonomy, architecture, back cards type of thing. Oh boy, it's like there's a rock, a hard place, and an asteroid waiting to hit me on the head. So no decisions have actually, been made yet. Most likely is, it will end up getting updated, but that's going to depend on either us moving to TI for DSPs, or the availability of analog devices, DSPs.
Yep.
And then we have to deal with essentially the rightful wrath of someone who might have bought one, recently, and it's like, wait, you said it's upgradable. It's like, yes, it will still be upgradable to, new USB cards, new, things like that. It's just that now you have to move to a different, platform if you want to upgrade farther.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And none of those answers is great. I mean, honestly.
But that's the reality of product lines sometimes, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, and the reality of upgradable products is how do you plan for an infinitely protean future?
Yep.
You don't. There even upgradable stuff is going to have an end. It's just upgradable might mean 10 years or 15 years instead of 2 or 3. And maybe that's worth it for you. Maybe it's not. Our non-upgradable products tend to be the inexpensive stuff. The upgradable stuff is more expensive.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking about this one, but yeah, I'd actually love to see more autonomy stuff. But take that up to Yggy. Now you got to put it in a new box. Have fun with that one.
That's right.
So again, there's a lot of not ideal choices. Yeah. We've said that we will protect people's investment in Yggy, because I think something you spend $2,200 to $2,600 on, even though right now it's like that's the sales tax on some of the competition. I think that's at a level where, okay, I do want to have a continuity, where it's like we will be able to upgrade you. Bifrost 2, there will probably be an end date to that eventually, but that's going to be shit with autonomy. It might be 10 or 15 years out. It's way out.
Which is great.
It's way out now. So,
and that's way beyond. I can't think of any competitors off the top of my head. I'm sure there will be some, but I can't think of any that would allow for that sort of longevity. Where we're living in a world where I've got a product, I won't name and shame it, but I've got a product here on my desk. There's a product I really like. I've reviewed it recently and gave it good raps, but it's the third version in the space of about 4 years, I think. And this is the culture of the hobby in a lot of places, is there's a new version every other. There's the Pro version, and there's the Pro Plus version, or there's the Mark II and the Mark III. And I think it's nice to see that 10-year lifespan of a potential product that can be upgraded along the way. That's pretty cool.
We're trying, but like I said, there are no easy answers. That's the tough part.
Yeah.
And I'd love to have a great answer for you for Yggy. I'd love to be able to say, oh yeah, Gungnir Multibit is going to be continuing. Right now, a lot of that stuff's up in the air. I know that we're going to continue to sell Yggy. We have still the 3 flavors, and we still have Bifrost is a strong focus. I was sad I had to raise the price on that but oh my God, the price pressure everywhere is completely insane right now.
Yeah, I was chatting to a local manufacturer recently, and I think they said aluminium prices went up by 100% for them, like literally doubled. So I'm guessing that's hitting you as well.
It's hitting everyone, and in fact, you'll be seeing a couple new products from us soon. It was hilarious because we spent a ton of money tooling up, simplifying, not simple, but actually making them look better, but making them simpler to make, saving a ton of money, going to steel, et cetera, and in the end, what we got was parity because the prices went up. So it's like you have to stay the same,
which is better than doubling the price.
Could be worse, but it's really sad. And then we've seen amazing things. It's like the black powder coat that we use on our black products. That became unavailable this year. I'm like, how do you not?
Oh, wow.
Powder coat. So we did a copy of it. We had another company do a copy of it, and it's exact. You can't tell.
Okay.
But it's like, are you kidding me? This is, of course, after I told everyone, if you get black, it's totally safe. Aluminum's kind of chancy. Black's great. It's all the same. It'll be perfect forever. Yeah, and that's when they're like, oh, by the way, you can't get that.
Wow.
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, this is what we have to deal with. We are trying to make it so that that things are easy on the customers, and it's understandable. But if you actually see kind of things move around, and aluminum goes up in price, and black gets a little weird, that's what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, it's just the world, isn't it?
It is, and it's not a lot of fun actually, even with a local supply chain.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, at least you're not dealing with international shipping and stuff like that for a lot of. I mean, some of your products will be coming internationally, I'm guessing, but you do keep a lot local, don't you?
Yeah, almost. I mean, the vast majority by cost is local.
Yep.
All the chassis, the boards, all that stuff, that's done here. It's either hilariously the chassis are done. We ship the steel from Texas to California, stamp it in California, and ship it back to Texas. We'll fix that. We'll fix that. And then on boards, they may be made in California, Nevada, Utah, or Texas.
Right.
Yeah, but that's it. So the vast majority of stuff is done here, but we can't say made in USA. We have to say assembled in USA.
Because you'd be getting chips, for instance, like the processors and stuff are
Right.
international, aren't they?
According to the US FTC, I mean, 100% of it pretty much has to be made in USA. That includes like the resistors. Right. You tell me where I get US made thin film resistors.
Yeah.
They don't exist. So it's fine. We're not going to fight it. And you know what? For you guys, lots of other people in the world, does it really matter if it's made in the US?
That's it. Really doesn't. I think obviously you'll have a huge US customer base, but for someone like me sitting in Australia, New Zealand, Asia, Europe, it's irrelevant.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I understand that. Everyone who works with us understands that. But I do like to keep things local. I do like to, go and see our suppliers. When you see some of the new stuff coming out, you'll be like, wow, how the heck did they do that?
Okay.
At that price, because it's like we're kind of bringing back a lot of the old school stamping aspects of things. And
okay.
You'll see. It's going to be
exciting. I look forward to it. Now, I've kept you past the time that we'd planned. Let me just quickly skim my questions. We've covered everything except one thing, and this might be a really quick question because you might say no. Just ducking back around to the Folkvangr before I produce my review of that one. Is there anything you've learned about the Folkvangr since its release? So hearing people's feedback, comments, everyday usage situations, is there anything that you've learned along the way that would be valuable to share with the broader audience that might have picked one up or still thinking about grabbing one of those last few?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. People really keep coming back to Grados, which are not comfortable headphones. Sorry, Grado. It's true.
That's
they know
just
that.
The truth. Yeah.
They know that. There's some magic with Grados. There's actually magic with the ZMF. Actually, a lot of the Focal stuff works really well with it.
Yeah, I've got the new clear MGs here and fired those up and was very impressed. Yeah,
what I've learned mainly is like this is less crazy than I thought. I'd love to do a Valhalla 3 that picks. I mean, Valhalla 2 is 11. It's going to be 11 years old next year.
Wow.
So might be a bit of a hint of where we're going. The problem is how do you keep it at Valhalla prices?
Yeah.
And not have a bunch of tubes. Clearly, you'll be much more reliant on the impedance multiplier in that case. But the idea of a OTL and OCL tube amp, I don't think it's as crazy as I thought it was, because I was very nervous. I listened to it for about a year before we brought it out, because I'm like, is the DC low enough? Is the is the function safe enough? And even then, I'm like, we really need to have things saying, please don't use IEMs. Do not use IEMs with this thing. Don't. Just stop right now. Very bad idea on many, many levels. But it does seem to be quite safe with over-the-ear headphones.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had nothing but pleasurable. There's a couple that doesn't drive, like it's not a great fit with something like a Susvara that's really current hungry.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah. But with everything else, LCD 5s, all the dynamics, the Mesa headphones, it loves them. So yeah, it's not the best synergy with all of them, but it drives them just fine.
Yeah, that's kind of my experience. Is like you get down into some of the crazier headphones, like Mr. Speakers, the Aeon, the Dan Clark Aeons, the 13 ohm stuff. Oh no, it's not going to happen. Some of the very very low impedance stuff is problematic with it.
Yeah,
but it won't hurt it. I mean, it's tubes. You can't really blow it up. They've been dead reliable, which is great. Whenever you bring out a new product, new idea, if you're an engineer, the first question in your mind should be, is it reliable?
Yeah. And these have obviously been solid for you.
Yeah, and these have been solid. Same with Layer Plus, but we have a lot longer, production qualification time.
Yeah.
We have a company that shall remain nameless. They're like, hey, we'd like to have you do an amp for this specific crazy driver we have. I'm like, that's a really interesting driver, and I'd love to do it. And they're like, oh, and can it be shipping by CES? And I just started laughing. CES 2024?
Yeah.
But no, it's like, are you kidding me? It's like you can't just throw something out there.
No, too damaging to reputation, upset customers, all that stuff. Yeah.
Can you have a prototype by this CES? Probably. I'm like, well, that's not what we're looking for. I'm like, well, then, someone else might have a better shot at it.
That's it. Yep. Yeah. Happy hunting.
Yeah.
That's great, Jason. Thank you so much for all the insights and info today. I'm hoping that for the viewers, this has given a really nice sense of Schiit's digital kind of current and future to a degree. Anything else you wanted to share before we wrap things up? Is there anything that was on your mind that we didn't touch on?
No, I mean, I think that pretty much does it. I mean, we have our own digital technologies. We have our own digital filter. We are working on our own Delta Sigma modulator. We have our own unique approach, to digital. Mike will say it's the be-all, end-all, and I will say, hey, it's a unique approach. I like that. I do like the fact we have a point of view. And we also do inexpensive stuff, using ESS. That's about it. The behind-the-scenes stuff, the stuff that's kind of going to be more game-changing on the digital side, you'll probably start seeing next year.
Cool.
It's really funny because we have the analog design team, that's me, and then you have the digital design team, which is Mike, Dave, Ivana, and oh god, his name escapes me. Another guy who's doing the FPGA work, contract we're working with. So we have a very deep digital team. And you're like, what's happening with that? It's like, well, what happened with that was Schiit Multibit and Unison USB, and the preliminary stuff we did with the gadget. And what you haven't seen is what happens when that all comes together.
Yeah, right.
And that's really what we're looking at. Next year, you might be able to get the first glimpse of what it all looks like when it comes together.
Fantastic. We shall wait with bated breath for that one by the sound of it. I'm looking forward to it.
And going back to engineering lab, I hope it works and I hope it's reliable. That's bottom line.
That's it. Yep. That's great. I really appreciate your time as always, Jason. I know that the viewers get a huge kick out of seeing these interviews and discussions. So thanks again for your time and all the info.
No, thank you. I mean, I love talking about stuff like this. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to make up something.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we should definitely talk about scheduling something in the new year for at whatever time is appropriate, and I'll wait till I see some of your Q&As or Head5 posts, and then I'll bounce down an email and say it sounds like it's time. Can we bend your ear again?
You'll see. I suspect when the one thing comes out, you'll be like, are you completely insane?
I hope so. I hope so.
Oh.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Jason, and I look forward to talking again soon.
Cool. Excellent. I look forward to talking to you soon.
Brilliant.
Okay.